In the Book of Mormon, for some reason, Mormon decided to include this curious story of the Nephites discovering these lost golden plates and taking them to a seer who translated them using the Urim and Thummim, and then reading them and discovering that this record provided them with, quote, much knowledge, end quote. Doesn't this story sound a little like Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon record in our day? Did Mormon foreshadow the coming forth of the Book of Mormon in the Book of Mormon? We're going to find that out today and look at some of these parallels. God has always promised Israel that he will foretell her history before it happens. And this happened for the Nephite people. They were given a record to warn them, just as we have been given the Book of Mormon record in our day. So in the Book of Mormon, there is this story of King Mosiah sending this man named Ammon to go find this group of lost Nephites. Now, this is a different Ammon than his son Ammon, who, of course, we will learn about later with the sons of Mosiah, who goes on the mission to the Lamanites. This is a different Ammon, but King Mosiah sends this other Ammon to go and find this group of lost Nephites who had disappeared after they took off on this sort of adventure or search party to see if somehow they could take back the land of their first inheritance, the land of Nephi. If you remember, when Lehi and Nephi first came to America, they were in the land of Lehi. Nephi had to then escape because of Laman and Lemuel, and he went to a new location that was called the land of Nephi. And the Nephites prospered there for a while until they became wicked. And then Mosiah had to lead out a group of righteous Nephites to leave because the Nephites in the land of Nephi were going to be destroyed. This is King Mosiah, the grandfather of the main Mosiah that we hear about. Hopefully that isn't confusing. This is the King Mosiah that led this group of Nephites out was the father of King Benjamin. So sometime later, there was this man named Zeniff who took this group of Nephites back to the land of inheritance to see, can we get our property back? Is there some way to go back and get our homes back? And they disappeared and no one knew what happened to them. And so now King Benjamin's son, Mosiah, is now the king. And the Nephites are asking him what happened to this group of people led by this man named Zeniff, who were among the Nephites but went back to the land of Nephi to see if maybe they could take the land back and get their home and their property. And so the Nephites kept pestering Mosiah. So finally he calls this man named Ammon and he says, Ammon, I want you to go back to the land of Nephi, see if you can find out what happened to Zeniff's people. Well, Ammon shows up and he discovers that there's this whole history that's been going on with this man named King Noah and his son King Limhi, and the people went into apostasy. This prophet came and he was martyred. And of course, we're going to learn later about Alma reorganizing the church at that time. And there's all this story that we're going to go into and begin unfolding in the Book of Mormon, right? But for the purposes of this lesson, we're going to focus on this story that King Limhi tells Ammon. He says, actually, I sent a group of Nephites to try to find Mosiah and Zarahemla too. So, it's both groups of Nephites have been looking for each other. And King Limhi's group didn't find Zarahemla, but they found these ruins, this destroyed civilization. And they found among these ruins these 24 plates of gold. And they bring them back, but the problem was they were written in an unknown language. And so King Limhi is asking Ammon, he says, do you know any way to translate this record? And Ammon says, yes, actually, our king, King Mosiah, is a seer. He has the Urim and Thummim, and he can translate this record. And there's this whole conversation. Mormon goes on, including all of these details in this conversation between King Limhi and Ammon about seers and their role and how this record actually ends up being translated by Mosiah. Well, why is Mormon including this in the Book of Mormon? Why is he using precious room when his space is limited, his time is limited? Why is this story so important? Well, let's start walking through the parallels. Let's start looking at this. Let's look at the Jaredite plates of gold and then the Nephite record, which was translated by Joseph Smith. And we're going to discover that these two events parallel one another, and that Mormon is specifically including details in the Book of Mormon about the translation of the Book of Mormon that we need to know today more than ever before. So as we dive into this story, the Jaredites lived on the American continent. Of course, the Nephites also lived on the American continent. The Jaredite nation is described as being as numerous as the hosts of Israel. And in like manner, the Nephite nation was also described as being numerous as it were the sand of the sea. The Jaredite record was discovered in a land which was covered with the bones of men and of beasts, according to Mosiah 8:8. And in like manner, there are records of early American settlers and explorers describing the calcium deposits that they uncovered when they came to this land, human bones and skulls and hundreds of arrowheads. They could tell there had once been a battle on this land, just as Limhi's people described when they found the Jaredite record. And Mormon specifically includes that. He's trying to set this picture and paint this picture to say, hey, when they discovered the Jaredite record, that was very similar to when Joseph Smith discovers the Nephite record. The Jaredite record is discovered in a land among many waters, the Book of Mormon says. Of course, the Nephite record was discovered in upstate New York, near Lake Ontario, and many other lakes, the Seneca Lake and the Canandaigua Lake, and many other. You could definitely describe that area as a land of many waters. The Jaredite record was hit up by a lone witness, the survivor of the Jaredite destruction, Ether. In very like manner, who hit up the Nephite record? Moroni, the lone witness and survivor of the Nephite destruction. The Jaredite record, very similar to the Nephite record, was recorded in this language that no one knew, and so it required someone who could interpret languages. In the same way, we know that the Nephite record was sealed. It's in this language that no one knew at the time, and it required Joseph Smith with the gift and the power of God to be able to unlock this lost language and translate the Nephite record so that we could have the Book of Mormon today. So as we continue moving through these parallels, let's keep asking ourselves the question, again, why is Mormon including all of these details? Why are these details important? Again, when he has limited room, very precious space, why do we need to know this today? Well, first off, Mormon describes the translation process that Mosiah uses when translating the Jaredite plates. He says they are translated by a seer, and they're translated with the Urim and Thummim, and he describes the Urim and Thummim. The Urim and Thummim was two stones which were fastened into the two rims of a bow. He says that the ability to translate this is a gift from God. Now let's go to our day. We know, according to the repeated testimony of Joseph Smith, that he translated the Nephite record not just with a Urim and Thummim, but the Nephite Urim and Thummim. In fact, the same Urim and Thummim that Mosiah used. Mosiah was a seer, Joseph Smith was a seer, and they used the same tool that was actually described in the Book of Mormon as being specifically prepared for this purpose. God specifically prepared these two stones in the rims of a bow, which is exactly, that's the description that is used in the Book of Mormon for Mosiah's instrument and Mosiah's translation process. That's exactly how Moroni and Joseph Smith also describe Joseph Smith's Nephite and Jaredite Urim and Thummim. So Mosiah and Joseph Smith, they have the same gift. They're using the same tool to bring forth a record by the gift and power of God with the same purpose. In the Book of Mormon, it talks about how the Nephites needed the Jaredite record because it gave them much knowledge and it contained a mystery of God. In our day, that is the purpose of the Book of Mormon. That is why we're sitting here with this podcast, right? Is studying the Book of Mormon from that perspective, understanding that it gives us much knowledge. Now, why would Mormon take this time to describe the translation process, though? I mean, okay, that's interesting, the parallels. Why? Is it just trivia? A lot of people will say that today. It doesn't matter how the translation happened. But why does Mormon seem to think that it really matters how the translation happened? It matters so much that he's going to specifically parallel it in the Book of Mormon. Let's talk about that for a moment. In our day, the translation process of the Book of Mormon is under heavy debate and attack. For over 190 years, the predominant story told by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was, from the words of Joseph Smith himself, that he translated the Book of Mormon by the gift and power of God using the Urim and Thummim. And the Urim and Thummim was specifically described as an instrument, two transparent stones fastened in the rims of a bow and attached to a breastplate. It was a special tool that was provided to him with the plates. But around the time that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon, there was another story that was promoted by enemies of the church and enemies of Joseph Smith. And that story was that Joseph Smith did not translate the Book of Mormon using the Urim and Thummim, but that he translated using a dark stone that was a seer stone that Joseph Smith had used in a career of treasure digging and ritual magic and folk magic activities he and his family were allegedly involved in. So there was the story that was being promoted, and it was promoted every time by men and women who were either enemies of the church and had never been members, and they hated the church and they had an agenda and a motivation to destroy Joseph Smith, or from individuals who had apostatized, that when they gave these statements, they were in an apostate condition, they had abandoned the church and abandoned their testimony of Joseph Smith. Every single one of these accounts. So for over 190 years, the predominant story adopted by faithful members of the church was that Joseph Smith used the Urim and Thummim. Joseph Fielding Smith himself, who was, of course, a president of the church, and also he was a church historian for over 60 years, he went through all of these accounts and he wrote his stated testimony that he believed that the seer stone opinion and narrative being promoted about the translation of the Book of Mormon was, quote, hearsay, end quote. He said, I do not believe it. I do not believe that was how it was done. If you go to Joseph Smith's own writings, if you go to the Book of Ether, it is very clear that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon using the Nephite, Jaredite, Urim, and Thummim. Because it is true, every statement from Joseph Smith and every statement from Oliver Cowdery is very clear. None of them support the seer stone narrative in any way. They are all very clear supporting the Urim and Thummim narrative. We actually wrote an entire book about this called Seer Stone versus Urim and Thummim, Book of Mormon Translation on Trial, where we walk through this and we walk through the accounts of David Whitmer and we walk through other accounts and we show how they are not credible testimonies and they actually contradict Joseph Smith. So you're in a situation where you need to believe, did Joseph Smith tell the truth or did Joseph Smith lie? Or was he not forthright and honest about the details of the translation? And do we need to adopt other stories? Every seer stone in a hat translation statement comes from an apostate or anti-Mormon source. This is very critical to understand in understanding the history. Joseph Smith and Oliver, again, the only two eyewitnesses involved in the translation, taught on numerous occasions that the translation was performed only using the Urim and Thummim and the plates, and that it was a literal character translation. With the Joseph Smith Foundation, we have produced podcasts and we've done interviews and articles, and of course the Seer Stone versus Urim and Thummim book, diving deep into the Book of Mormon translation and everything else like that. And you can go to our website for more information on that. But for the purpose of this lesson, I just want to focus on the Book of Mormon parallels, because this is another testimony to the Urim and Thummim translation account that isn't often talked about or is rarely talked about, and I haven't talked about it myself in many contexts discussing the translation of the Book of Mormon, but is important. When Mormon parallels the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, how does he describe it? Does he describe it as a translation process where Mosiah uses, a Urim and Thummim and a dark seer stone interchangeably? Does he describe it as a translation process using a dark stone in a hat? Or does he describe the translation process as done by the gift and power of God using 2 stones set in the rims of a bow and exercising that gift through seership, which is described in the Book of Mormon as a gift that there is none greater that God can give you? But why would the translation process even matter? Why would it matter enough, again, for Mormon to include it and foreshadow it in the Book of Mormon? Well, here are a few thoughts why. First, Mormon knew that this issue was going to be hotly debated in our day. He knew we were going to be debating this and wondering, how did Joseph Smith translate the Book of Mormon? Can we trust Joseph Smith's account? Has our church history been inaccurate? Has our artwork been inaccurate? Have we even been deceptive to some extent of hiding details that maybe weren't very comfortable to many members of the church? Or is the dominant narrative that was established, is the narrative that Joseph Smith taught true? So that is one aspect for why Mormon may have inserted this and felt that it was important enough to use valuable time and space in the Nephite record. Second, the character of Joseph Smith matters. Now, we've done a lot of research and there's a lot of material on our website talking about the whole controversy of, was Joseph Smith involved in treasure digging and magic and the magical worldview and everything? And you can go there. There will be resources included for all of that in the supplemental resources for this lesson on the Joseph Smith Foundation website. But from the Book of Mormon, we understand that character matters and that to be a seer and to be a translator in God's work requires character, requires righteousness. It is a gift from God. There's this conversation that King Limhi has with Ammon where King Limhi says a seer is greater than a prophet. And Ammon says, well, a seer is a revelator and is a prophet also. But he says, a gift which is greater can no man have, unless he should possess the power of God, which no man can. You can have power given to you come from God, but you cannot possess all of God's power. So he says it's basically seer is the greatest thing that you can achieve in this life. And he says a seer can know of things which are past, things which are to come. By them shall all things be revealed, secret things be made manifest. Hidden things shall come to life, and things which are not known shall be made known by them, and also things shall be made known by them which otherwise could not be known. So, in other words, it's a big deal that Joseph Smith was a seer. It is a big deal that Mosiah was a seer. And Mormon's trying to point this out. He's saying, guys, some of you are going around in your day saying that Joseph Smith was kind of this bumbling idiot, that he was arrogant, that he was prideful, that he made a lot of mistakes, that some of his words are trustworthy, some are not, that maybe he lied or covered up his history and involvement in treasure digging. You know, he said he wasn't involved in it at all, and which Joseph Smith did. He was asked, were you involved in this career in money digging? And he said, look, I worked for one person as a common laborer. I made a little bit of money until I could finally convince the guy to give up this stupid job, and that's it. That I never was involved in this big, long, these escapades, going out with my family, doing treasure digging. That's it. Was Joseph Smith telling the truth about that? Or was Joseph Smith lying? And so Mormon's saying, guys, Joseph Smith was not this lowlife that needs to be pulled off his pedestal. He was a seer, and you cannot have a greater gift from God than having that gift. Joseph Smith received the greatest gift that can be given to man in this life. That is huge. The other key is if you study God's order for translation and the implications for receiving a Urim and Thummim, principles that are actually in the temple, how this ties into the Aaronic priesthood, which is it's a whole nother conversation about what we know about translation and it being a gift from God, and seership and the teachings from the scriptures and the words of the prophets on that topic. What we understand is that to be a seer and a translator requires following God's priesthood order. It's not just something that anybody just does. It's something that requires authority. It requires following laws. And it is even tied into the temple and tied into covenants. So Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon was not just this thing that he did and he kind of chose what instrument he wanted to use. No, it was a project assigned by the Lord to be done the Lord's way. And the Lord specifically told Joseph Smith in the Doctrine and Covenants numerous times how to translate, the tools to use, how to do it. And again, if you go through all of the credible statements on the translation of the Book of Mormon, you discover that Mormon's account of Mosiah's translation is a direct parallel to Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon using the Urim and Thummim by the gift and power of God. He used the plates, he used the characters. It was a translation process. The plates were not covered on the table or locked up in some chest. He used the plates, he used the Urim and Thummim, and he dictated that book to Oliver Cowdery and the other scribes by the gift and the power of God. Again, we can't go into all of the research here because that's not the purpose of this lesson, but you can get the book. You can look into the other research that we have if you are interested in learning more. So if we go back to the Book of Mormon, though, in Mosiah 8:18, Mormon points out something else about translation processes. He says, God has provided means that man, through faith, might work mighty miracles. Therefore, he becometh a great benefit to his fellow beings. In other words, the purpose of seership, the purpose of translating these documents and these records is to be a great benefit to the children of God. And of course, when we look at Joseph Smith, who was a seer and was a translator, we know that Joseph Smith has done more, save Jesus only, for the salvation of men in this life than any other prophet. Joseph Smith is truly a hero. He is someone to look to and aspire to be like in whatever ways that we can. Returning to Mormon's account of the translation of the Jaredite record and these Jaredite gold plates, we see a few other details that you can tell, Mormon's slipping in there, probably hoping that we'll catch on and say, hey, this is just like the Book of Mormon in our day. So it is recorded in Mosiah 8 that the physical plates, these Jaredite physical plates, were witnesses that the testimony of these men who found this record, that the testimony they were giving was true. So the plates were a witness, but there were other witnesses as well. And these were swords and breastplates. Now think about our day. What objects were the 3 and 8 witnesses shown to bear testimony that the Book of Mormon was true? They were shown the plates themselves, they were shown the sword of Laban, and the breastplate. Notice the parallels. Probably Mormons trying to emphasize to us to kind of give a backup and say, yeah, their witness was true. They really were shown these objects. And just as the Jaredite record had these artifacts that were served as a purpose to help witness to the Jaredite record, you have the Book of Mormon in our day, and you have these other objects, the breastplate, the sword of Laban, and the plates themselves that are also artifacts to add credence and testimony to the Book of Mormon record itself. Now, why would the sword of Laban be important? Important enough that we need to know that it is a witness of the Nephite record. We're going to play a little clip here from Nephites in Europe, going into just some of the fascinating little-known church history accounts about the sword of Laban. Hope you enjoy this. We know that Nephite prophets deposited the legendary sword of Laban, wagon loads of Nephite plates, and other rich treasures in the area around or in the Hill Cumorah. Brigham Young and other early saints remembered hearing of a cave that Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery were permitted to visit when they returned the Nephite plates.
Oliver Cowdery went with the prophet Joseph when he deposited these plates. The hill opened, and they walked into a cave in which there was a large and spacious room. There was a pile of plates as much as 2 feet high, and there were altogether in this room more plates than probably many wagon loads. They were piled up in the corners and along the walls. Brigham Young.
The prophet Joseph Smith, he was emphatic that the Hill Cumorah in the state of New York was the very Hill Cumorah in which Mormon and Moroni hid the records and other treasures.
Joseph Smith said that cave contained tons of choice treasures and records. Wilford Woodruff.
I heard Brigham Young at an evening meeting in Cedar City describe an apartment in the Hill Cumorah. There was great wealth in the room in sacred implements, vestments, arms, precious metals, and precious stones, more than a 6-mule team could draw. Jesse N. Smith.
The name of the famous sword of the Nephilim, or Nephite people in Europe, was called Valming. In Old Norse, it meant wrath, anger, perhaps even king and warrior. Now it's interesting because Joseph and Oliver saw the sword of Laban inscribed with a very similar message.
The first time Joseph and Oliver went there, the sword of Laban hung upon the wall. But when they went again, it had been taken down and laid upon the table across the gold plates. It was unsheathed, and on it was written these words: "This sword will never be sheathed again until the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of our God and His Christ." Brigham Young.
Both the famous sword of the Nephilim and the iconic sword of Laban were symbols of God's wrath and judgment. Is this just another coincidence, or is this parallel far more compelling?
Okay, we could keep going and going on the parallels between the Jaredite record and the Nephite record, but let's pick up here a little bit. The Jaredite record was, of course, written on pure gold. The Book of Mormon was written on pure gold. The Jaredite plates contained engravings in a language unknown to anyone alive at the time. And of course, the Book of Mormon plates contained Reformed Egyptian engravings that were completely unknown to anyone in Joseph Smith's day. The Jaredite record, it is recorded, were of great importance to the Nephites. It gave them, quote, much knowledge, end quote. And meanwhile, in our day, the Book of Mormon, we know, was written for us. We need it. It will provide us so much knowledge. It is a powerful tool for good in our day. This is one fascinating but almost completely unknown historical testimony to the importance of the Book of Mormon that actually comes from the original documents of the Doctrine and Covenants. So today, if you go and read Doctrine and Covenants section 5, the text that we read today in the Doctrine and Covenants is different than the text of the original revelation that was given by Joseph Smith. Now, you don't need to panic. We're not talking about different in the sense of Joseph Smith changed doctrine or hid things, or just the revelation was revised during one of the printing processes, and there was a paragraph that was not included. There's probably numerous reasons for this, probably context, understanding, explanation, being concise, what's relevant to people. But if you go to the original 1833 version of D&C 5, there is this verse describing what the Book of Mormon is going to do in our day. This is the Lord speaking, and he says, "If the people of this generation harden not their hearts, I will work a reformation among them." Remember, the context of this revelation is the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. And the Lord says, if people will listen to the Book of Mormon and they will use it, I will work a reformation among them. I will put down all lyings, deceivings, priestcrafts, envyings, strifes, idolatries, and sorceries, all manner of iniquities, and I will establish my church like unto the church which was taught by my disciples in the days of old, end quote. Isn't that powerful? I love that description of what the Book of Mormon can do in our day. Again, it's a testimony from the Lord that we can ask ourselves, do we believe this? Do we believe the Book of Mormon could put down all of the lying and priestcraft and sin in our world? Let's put our faith in that, and I believe that we will see greater miracles than we have seen up to this time. Again, in Mosiah 8, the Jaredite record is recorded as containing a great mystery, that it will reveal the cause of why the Jaredite nation fell. And of course, what is the purpose of the Book of Mormon? To not just reveal a great mystery, but all things from the foundation of the world unto the end thereof. That's from 2 Nephi 27:10, to reveal many of the mysteries of God. Now, of course, that verse, I should clarify, is not just the Book of Mormon that we have, but also including the sealed portion, which will hopefully come forward at some future day when we are righteous to receive it. But for the point at this time, it is that, yes, the Book of Mormon contains these many mysteries of God. And the Book of Mormon tells us, why did the Nephites fall? What was the cause of their fall? To serve as a warning and a witness for our day. The Nephites had this great desire for the Jaredite record to be translated. Joseph Smith and Oliver, of course, had a great desire to have the Book of Mormon translated. Another little known fact about the Jaredite gold plates is that there was actually a sealed portion of the Jaredite record, just like there's a sealed portion of the Nephite record. And you can read about this in Ether 4:1, that when Jesus Christ came to the Nephites at Bountiful, that sealed portion of the Jaredite record was actually brought forth and given to the people. In our day, we've been promised the same thing, that the Nephite record written by Mormon has a sealed portion, and that when Jesus Christ returns, when we are righteous as a people and we have built Zion, we will be given that sealed portion. Something else to notice as you're reading these chapters in Mosiah and noticing the parallels between the Jaredite record and the coming forth of the Jaredite record with the coming forth of the Book of Mormon is the environment that surrounds it. Zeniff and his people go through wars, and you can read the descriptions of how they were fighting those wars, why they had the wars, the problems they had in their society. I do not believe this is an accident. You'll notice, what was the environment and the culture like at the time the Jaredite record was found? Well, the Book of Mormon describes this in these chapters in Mosiah. The people were in bondage because they had rejected God. They were in a state of apostasy. Many of them were struggling to be faithful to God. Some of them were solid, but many of them were not. There was a lot of contention. There was a lot of fighting. And if you look at the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, in the early 1800s, we were moving into a very similar time period of history. There were good, faithful Christians in America in Joseph Smith's day, but there was also a lot of apostasy. You had reverends and ministers who were denying miracles, who were denying that God could speak. You had ministers and Christians who were engaging in the occult, in witchcraft, in satanic activities. You have instances of immorality. There was definitely a problem. Just because someone was a Christian did not mean they were truly a disciple of Jesus Christ. There were faithful Christians, and then there were people who were hypocrites and imposters. And you see, before that time period, Zeniff is fighting these wars among the Lamanites. And as I was pondering this, and I was thinking, why is Mormon including this? Why does he want us to know about these battles and the struggle for blood to obtain the land of their inheritance, right? Zeniff is fighting so that his people can be in the land of Nephi. And they have to pray to God to be delivered because of these Lamanites that are coming against them. And one thought that came to my mind was the Revolutionary War that happened shortly before the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, which the Lord describes in the Doctrine and Covenants as redeeming the land by the shedding of blood. So just something as you're exploring these parallels is to remember that we're talking about symbolism and metaphors and foreshadowing. This is a prophetic book that has to be understood with the spirit of prophecy, and every detail in it is to teach us how God works. And one of those principles is that before God is able to give a people greater light and knowledge, a price has to be paid. And that greater light and knowledge, though, is also given to help correct apostasy in their day, help bring them back to God, and that is definitely the role that the Jaredite record played for the people of Limhi. They went through a severe scourging from rejecting Abinadi. They were in bondage, but they were able to come out and repent and be delivered and be liberated from that bondage, and the Jaredite record played a role in that. As we close out here talking about sacred records, I want to step back for a moment and talk big picture parallels of records with the Book of Mormon in our day. In the Nephite civilization, when you read the Book of Mormon, the Nephites had 3 chief scriptural records. First, they had the plates of brass. The plates of brass had the creation recorded all the way down to their day. It served as the foundation from their culture and their government, and the Book of Mormon describes it as like unto the Bible. Right there, the brass plates sound similar to the Bible. What does the Bible have? The history of the creation down. The Bible served as the foundation of our culture and government. It's what gave us the ability to be a light to the world, and it is like unto the brass plates. Well, the Nephites also had these Jaredite gold plates, this translation that was given them by a seer that recorded the record of a fallen people. In our day, in addition to the Bible, we also have the Book of Mormon as well, which is the record of a fallen people. It was translated by the Urim and Thummim. It is given to us for our day, and it was found at the Hill Cumorah. In addition to the brass plates and the Jaredite record, the Nephites also had a third group of scripture, and that was the revelations and writings of their contemporary prophets, men like Alma the Younger and others. In our day, in addition to the Bible and the Book of Mormon, we also have a third group of records, revelations and writings of contemporary prophets. This includes the Doctrine and Covenants and, of course, the writings of other inspired presidents of the church. I don't think this is an accident either. Mormon is trying to teach us and show us these parallels to show the importance of Scripture and what those 3 groups of Scripture are, both in the Nephites' day and in our day. And in our day, this is a very needed message. Elder Bruce R. McConkie gave a prophecy during his life where he spoke about our neglect of the Book of Mormon, our neglect of the Scriptures, and what we are missing out on because of that. He stated, quote, "I am clear in my mind that the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon will not come forth until the millennium. The same is undoubtedly true of the fullness of the Bible, though some additions could well be made before that time. The perfected Bible of the future will surely include all that was on the brass plates of Laban. Someday, the Lord will raise up a prophet who will also be a seer and a translator, to whom he will give the brass plates, that they may be translated for the benefit and blessing of those in all nations. Would to God that the work might commence at least in our day, though in fact, we have no such hope. Why should the Lord give us what is on the brass plates, or in the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon, when we do not even treasure up and live by what he has already given us?" End quote. Every time I read that statement from Elder McConkie, it hits me to the core when he says, would to God that could happen in our day, but we have no such hope because we do not take seriously what the Lord has given us. And if you think about it in this way, we have fallen short of even the Nephites. The Nephites had the brass plates, and we are not worthy of that record today. The reason I am bringing this up is because this is something that every single one of us can fix. The power is in our hands. Today, right now, every single one of us can resolve to take the Book of Mormon more seriously, to take the Bible, to take the modern day revelations more seriously so that we can come out from under the condemnation that President Benson and the Doctrine and Covenants have said that we are under as a people for treating lightly the Book of Mormon and the other revelations that have been given. King Limhi actually brings up this lament that he feels over the wickedness of the people and the slothfulness that all of us have in hearkening to the voice of the Lord when he's talking about the Jaredite gold plates. This is in Mosiah 8, verses 20 and 21, he says, "Oh, how marvelous are the works of the Lord, and how long doth he suffer with his people? Yea, and how blind and impenetrable are the understandings of the children of men. For they will not seek wisdom. Yea, they are as a wild flock which fleeth from the shepherd, and scattereth, and are driven and are devoured by the beasts of the forest." End quote. In our day, we are unsteady, and we are slow to realize the importance of the Book of Mormon. This is the reason why we are under condemnation as a people. This is why we are struggling. President Benson stated in 1988, he said, quote, "I have noted within the church a difference in discernment, insight, conviction, and spirit between those who know and love the Book of Mormon and those who do not. That book is a great sifter." End quote. President Benson later emphasized in his talk the power of the word, how the Book of Mormon really could solve so many of the problems that we try to solve through other means and programs and strategies. He said, quote, "Often we spend great effort in trying to increase the activity levels in our stakes. We work diligently to raise the percentages of those attending sacrament meetings. We labor to get a higher percentage of our young men on missions. We strive to improve the numbers of those marrying in the temple. All of these are commendable efforts and important to the growth of the kingdom. But when individual members and families immerse themselves in the scriptures regularly and consistently, these other areas of activity will automatically come. Testimonies will increase, commitment will be strengthened, families will be fortified, personal revelation will flow." End quote. I have learned the hard way several times in my life what it is like to try to do the right thing my way instead of the Lord's way. And every time I get turned back around, sometimes through humbling, sometimes by choosing to be humble, but eventually I always get turned around to realize the Lord's way is the way that works. And it's always easier, and it's always more effective, and it always has better results. In our day, many of us are trying to do good things, but at some point, every single one of us has to make the decision to bow the knee, to be humble, to turn to the Lord, to accept wisdom, as Limhi said, and decide that we are going to fight this battle the Lord's way. And I can bear my testimony that when we make that decision, we will see the powers of heaven unleash and miracles like we have never seen before.